for the event at the state capitol in the great state of Georgia last week. Quote, audit the vote rally. We the people demand a forensic audit. Got to get more of these forensic audits of the 2020 election to prove the election was stolen and Donald Trump is really still the president. At that event, here was what one Republican candidate for governor of Georgia had to say about why the audit is so important.
It's an audit, it's a decertification, and it's arrest.
That's right.
You know, we're scared to say arrest, right? We're scared because then they won't do the audit. But it's our government. And if you did treason against the Constitution, against the people of our country, you go to jail.
That's right.
You don't just lose your seat. You don't just get primary.
Right.
You go to jail. You die behind one. I don't die behind
I see somebody in the audience there yelling, shoot him! She's kind of getting up to the crescendo there of her remarks. So first you do the audit that shows you the election was stolen, then you decertify the election results, which is a made-up thing that election conspiracy theorists pretend will magically make Donald Trump president again. And then all the elected officials who you say stole the election, as she said, they don't just lose their seats, they don't just get primaried, they die by firing squad. She said, you don't just get primaried, you don't just lose your seat, you don't just get primaried, shoot them. You go to jail, or maybe you die by firing squad. We reached out to that Georgia Republican gubernatorial candidate tonight. She told us that we were misconstruing her remarks, and she's certainly not singling out current elected officials that she wants killed. She's just talking about the Constitution. But that's the rhetoric on the right now around these sham audits of the 2020 election results, which they are still doing and which they are trying to do more of all over the country. There's, this rally trying to gin up a forensic audit in Georgia. In Michigan last month, a rally demanding an audit of the 2020 election results there featured several Republican candidates for the state's top offices, with at least one of them calling for one of their Democratic opponents to be put in jail because of the need for an audit or something. Just today, the former Trump appointee and Stop the Steal activist running an election review in Wisconsin reportedly said he may need Republicans in the legislature to give him more taxpayer funds to keep funding his investigation because he hears rumors there may have been a lot of dead people who voted in Wisconsin last year, so he's going to need more money for his investigation because he's going to keep going. Today, there was new pushback on these sham election reviews, these sham audits, and it frankly came from an unexpected corner. It's a new open letter in which nearly 100 former high-ranking U.S. national security officials, ones who have served to both Democratic and Republican administrations, they've addressed Congress and told Congress, among other things, that they should put a stop to these so-called audits. Quote, we write to express our alarm at ongoing efforts to destabilize and subvert our elections, both through active disinformation campaigns and the related efforts to inject partisan interference into our professionally administered election process. Most concretely, partisan election reviews fueled by disinformation have increased the risk to election equipment and software by handing possibly sensitive election data and infrastructure over to inexperienced and unvetted third parties. There's also the risk of exposure of sensitive election or voter data. Foreign or malicious actors might attempt to leverage this information through disinformation that calls into question the integrity of the election process and sows doubt about the results of future elections. Congress should push back on unwarranted and unsafe reviews of completed elections. These sham audits are just one symptom of the election disinformation campaigns that these dozens of national security officials say pose a national security threat. They also point out the escalating threats to election workers at all levels, as well as the possibility for further political violence like January 6th. They're urging Congress to act to safeguard the integrity of our elections. Joining us now is one of the signatories to that letter, Jafet Ali. He's a former senior director for counterterrorism at the National Security Council under President Trump. Mr. Ali, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
Tell me about the nexus between national security and the sort of election disinformation and the sort of perverting of technocratic election expertise that you and your fellow signatories here are singling out.
Yeah, I think what we were trying to convey in the letter is that election security is not just an issue of domestic politics anymore, or has an impact only on the domestic side of things. This is a national security issue because now for the last several years, and what we saw with the 2016 elections and the 2020 elections, is that there are various actors and forces and on the foreign side adversaries who are actively trying to undermine democratic norms, systems, processes, some of which are election related. And this is a really troubling development. So there needs to be a complete paradigm shift in how we think about restoring the balance on these things that traditionally are foundations of our democracy. Action by Congress is only one part of a much larger piece.
But action by Congress feels a million miles away. I have to say I'm struck by the distinction or just by the difference between seeing yourself and all these other national security professionals who served under different Democratic and Republican administrations. Certainly, I'd put a lot of the signatories here in disparate places along the ideological number line yourselves. And that sort of unanimity that you all are expressing in terms of how this is a nonpartisan matter, this is a national security matter, this is something that we need to do for the good of the country, not in any way that's going to benefit any one partisan side. That sort of civic equanimity about it is completely absent in Congress, where what you're describing here is seen as a 100% partisan issue, where Republicans are against doing anything and Democrats are for it. What to you explains that distinction?
Well, again, we are a highly polarized country politically, but that doesn't mean there still aren't options for us to take and pursue on the national security side, led by career professionals or other folks who are just looking at this objectively. And I would put myself formally in that category in my government service. So again, if Congress can't deliver results or some of the solutions, because they're not going to be able to fix this on their own, the executive branch can come together and do different things without congressional action or support. But I also, going back to one of my original points about sort of a whole society approach, the nonprofit sector needs to get involved. The private sector, clearly, when it comes to social media and misinformation and disinformation. And then what can we all do as individual citizens to push back on this, whether it's through exercising our voting rights, whether it's through educating ourselves more to not fall prey to the misinformation and disinformation that's out there, to know what facts are and what is not the truth. So these are all parts of, again, a much bigger effort that needs to happen. And there has to be leadership on this at the national level. And that is, I think, where President Biden and some of the folks in the administration are trying to go on this front.
Having served in the Trump administration and having lived, like all of us have, through the last 6 years or so in terms of how things have changed around this issue in the Republican Party, I wonder if you have any insight into how to try to address the accelerationist nature of this on the right. I mean, we're seeing what started off as complaints that elections must be fixed in some way, in some inchoate way, to conspiracy theories that a small number of people tried to sell to others but were rejected by the courts, to now it being a not unusual thing in right-wing politics for people who are capitalizing on these things to call for the death, the imprisonment of people who resist them on this issue, people calling for civil war around these issues. I mean, the radicalism around this issue is accelerating, is getting worse. And I feel like people who are against the politicization and the undermining of our elections are sort of increasingly exasperated. But people who are promoting this perversion of our elections, they're getting emboldened, more radical, more extreme, and louder.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I just want to make clear, I was not a political appointee in the Trump administration. I served in the Trump White House as a career professional from the FBI. But going back to your point, that is one of the shifts in this issue, is that what was sort of on the fringe of sort of the extreme right has now, over the last 4 to 6 years, become mainstream at a political level. And whether that's due to the initial foreign influences that were promoting a lot of these beliefs and ideas in 2016 and have now become more mainstream in our domestic political landscape. I mean, it's a complex issue, but that is a troubling aspect of what we're seeing. And again, we have to figure out a way to get back to the center so we can come up with some solutions to make 2024 a much safer process for everyone involved.
Javed Ali, former Senior Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council. Thank you for your public service, and thanks for talking to us about this tonight. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
All right, we've got much more ahead tonight. Stay with us.